Hey everybody, how are you doing? Delighted to have back a fairly regular guest and friend of ours on the channel, Bill Holter, who was fundamental, let me just remind a number of people, for around the formation and the running of GATA, the Gold Antitrust Association, I believe was the name. So being on the side of sound money for longer than most people have been around and in this space. Bill, glad to have you back.
Thanks for having me back, Francis.
We started having a little bit of an off-board chat, and I just thought, man, we can't miss any of this. We've just got to get straight into it. This week and the events that have recently passed, along with the carry trade unwind, you were telling me an interesting headline. Go straight back in there and give us your take.
Yeah, we had 3 days where the Japanese stock market dropped 25%. I mean, that's 1987 stuff. And I expected to see margin calls. And I mean, obviously, there was no fallout whatsoever from it. And it's my thought process that central banks had to have put up trillions of dollars for these underwater, whoever's underwater, they met the margin calls. And a couple days, 3 days after that event, the headline was 75% of the yen carry trade had already unwound. Well, they say that the carry trade was 20 trillion. That's on books. What about what's off books? Is it really 50 trillion, 100 trillion, 200 trillion? Who knows? But it took 25 plus years to put that carry trade on. And they're trying to say that it was unwound in 3 days with no fatalities. That's an impossibility.
It does smell, doesn't it? It does smell. And when you say 75%, I mean, it's something I've seen regularly have occasional bloodlettings, the USD JPY. It has been the risk-off indicator for a while. But what tends to happen is you have a little bit of selling off and then it just gets all loaded back up again. And I found myself speculating. Derivatives, we know there's this huge iceberg below the waterline elements to the Ponzi scheme that we're facing in terms of debt and fiat system. And that is the word derivatives, the ice below the waterline that nobody sees or thinks, and very few people even seem to quantify. Could not the yen carry trade be absolute prime pickings for substantial derivative engagement on the basis of this super cheap funding source that lies?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent thought process, that the carry trade was funding. You had institutions that could borrow, basically for free. So they were able to borrow and then bet that money in the derivatives market. And I mean, derivatives, there's no telling the exact number, but if it was 1.3 trillion or 1.6 trillion, whatever the number was back in 2008, you can't tell me that number is less than that today. So, I mean, you're looking at a 2+ quadrillion derivatives market, and it's been, obviously a part of it was funded by the Japanese yen carry trade. So if you have anything that blows up that's associated with derivatives, then you've got players that have to exit the game. They're forced out of their position. And it just, like you said, it smells really, really bad. That in today's world, I mean, you see all kinds of things get covered up, but I think you're seeing the financial markets covered up also.
I love that cover it up, because we obviously were both in the financial space. You would have still already been a veteran when long-term capital management hit the buffers. And I wonder what they've learned from these events, that they seem to do a far better job. Because I'm pretty sure behind closed doors, there should have been a whole bunch of scrambling and mad panic. But in actual terms of the amount of eyeline sight we're getting for that has been kept to near zero. Apart from, a little bit of a yen trade unwind, nothing here, the narrative, the soothing narrative should be all fine and back to usual again. I wonder how good they've actually got at actually masking these shenanigans and these known risks they are known risks. They've all been allowed to borrow as if there's never an end. It's actually a mastery of potential news management. I'd love to get an insider that actually says, wow, we almost hit the buffers like 2008 again, but we're just not getting that news flow, are we? It seems to be the game is very well managed from a news point and getting out.
Right. Well, I mean, the whole game, whether it be political, societal, financial, it's all covered up. I mean, the news agencies are bought and paid for by the powers that be, and they only report what they're allowed to report. Now, I want to go back in history, and correct me if I'm wrong. Long-term capital management was a $3 billion problem in 1997. I mean, think about that. We went from $3 billion that could have taken the whole system down in 1997, fast forward 11 years to 2008, and we found out almost 2 years after the fact, in 2010, that the Federal Reserve lent $17 trillion all over the world to banks to keep them afloat. And I mean, all you have to do is look at commercial real estate. And I'm not talking just in the United States. Look at commercial real estate all over the world. I mean, that is an absolute disaster. And you're literally talking, trillions of dollars that are, in or going into bankruptcy. So, I mean, just commercial real estate alone could tip this thing upside down. You've got consumer credit, you've got auto loans, you've got residential loans now where people are falling behind. And look at what came out today. It's the 29th straight month where the economic leading indicators dropped month over month. So that's 29 months. That's almost, it's 2.5 years. So for 2.5 years, the economic leading indicators have been dropping. And the only reason that it is not forecasting a recession is because of the stock market. And I remember leading up to 2008, 2007, 2008, I can remember people saying, we don't need no stinking economy as long as we have the Dow Jones.
Yep. Indeed. I remember people telling us how the yield curve callers and all the panic talkers of the yield curve, it doesn't hold anymore in 2006 and 7. And it's funny to hear those same narratives again, some almost 20 years later on the yield curve inversions, and how it doesn't deal with the red hot labor market that we were supposedly having until that hit the buffers as well. It's almost as if we went into recession when we met the original criteria for a recession, when you were talking about those 20 odd months of downtrending economic indicators. Right. It's almost, it's clown world, isn't it, in terms of that denial?
Yeah, and let me remind your listeners that we have had, and I'm one of those that talked about the inverted yield curve. And let me just go back a little further. There have been recessions where there was not an inverted yield curve, but every single time since World War II that we had an inverted yield curve, we ultimately had a recession. Now, if you look at what just happened, because the yield curve has uninverted somewhat, it's not fully uninverted, but it's uninverting at this point.
I mean, the 30s and 2s inverted, reverted back. The 30s and 2s.
Right.
I know the popular measure is 10s and 2s, but that touched the zero line and then reverted back a little bit, been put back in the box for now.
Right, but the point I'm trying to make is this is the longest period of time in all of U.S. financial history that the yield curve was inverted. So, I mean, we've been inverted for 2+ years now, and people say, well, it doesn't matter. Look, nothing has happened. Well, what I'm going to say is when something happens, it's going to be the disaster of disasters.
Yeah. And it'll be so big a disaster, I'm going to expect a whole bunch of geopolitical distraction and potential wars and conflicts to be simultaneously dropped in a shock and awe media confusion spell of great duress. So I do feel it sounds like we say the same things every time, but that moment seems to be coming. I'll show you. I'll just bring up, because we got into the yield curve weeds, and to many people it's a confusing topic, but it's really worth understanding. What Bill was saying is you never invert on the yield curve and then revert back above the zero without having a major economic event, which is normally at least a recession and often more. And I was just highlighting that this particular version, because there's different long terms, the 30s minus the 2s, has quite clearly reverted above the zero. And whilst it's in a pullback, it remains above, and it's a leading indicator. The other aspect is it's a leading indicator. This all reverts, and then you get to find out the reason why. Unlike the Fed's labor stats, which is very much a lagging indicator, and they sees them always be late to the fire once the house is already burnt down. And the most popular yield curve inversion is the 10, which is back below zero, but again, as we highlight, only for now, and did actually touch the zero line, the blue line that I'm just showing over now. And this is essentially the difference between two yields on long-term debt and short-term debt. It's a big problem when short-term debt is actually got a higher yield than long-term because of inflation expectations. It's pointing to something far more severe. What else stuck for you since we last spoke? Because, boy, a whole bunch has happened. We've got gold at new highs, haven't we? Yeah.
Right, and I do want to mention, you said something about the labor market. That's, what the Fed looks at.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're looking at something that's completely false, complete blatant lies. If you look at John Williams' work, the way he calculates unemployment, the way it was back in the 1970s and early 1980s, before they started monkeying around with the way they calculate. And I mean, his number comes in between 17 and 20% unemployment. They don't count people who have been out of the labor market for, 6 months or a year or whatever.
Yeah.
Those people are just forgotten, but they're still unemployed. So the numbers are completely bogus.
Can I add something on that while you grab a thought there as well? The most interesting thing on participation in the economy for males is actually at all-time lows ever, because obviously when you go back to history, we're a bit more patriarchal. It's lower than the Depression of the 30s. Male participation rate. So all those guys that are not counting as unemployed because they've been looking for too long are actually cut out of the stats and are just like, hey, you're not playing anymore. You're sitting on the couch watching Netflix or the equivalent of, whilst hopefully trying to find work.
Or maybe they identify as females.
Indeed. It pays better. Excellent. Gold at new highs. Surely it's doing exactly what it should be doing, and it's gaining momentum.
Right. I mean, there's one train of thought that, the gold is moving up and the dollar is moving down because all of a sudden, in the quote, the polls, Kamala Harris is leading, and she's obviously a communist. And so is her running mate. So you've got selling in the dollar. I don't really buy that. I mean, I think you have to go back to October of last year, the lows, and what happened. The U.S. started talking about sequester. They had already sequestered the $300 billion of Russian funds, but then they started talking about taking those $300 billion of funds and using them. And they actually did use, I think it was $3 or $4 billion worth they borrowed against to fund Ukraine. Now, if you're Vladimir Putin and you see someone that you gave hard-earned investment capital to, taking your capital and then funding someone that you're fighting with, that's an absolute no-no. I mean, that breaks, every legal, moral statute there is. So that was the bottom in gold. Was back in late October, early November. And it coincided, I think, within 1 day of the announcement that we were going to use those funds. And you've got country after country that their central banks have been buying gold. And the reason being, gold has no borders. Gold is it's not a political tool. It cannot be diluted. If you hold the gold, it can't be sequestered. It can't be used. So what you've got is central banks and their countries are doing what's in their best interest. And their best interest is to get out of the dollar system. And that leads us to the BRICS, which is going to have a very big meeting in October. So I think you're going to see some fireworks come out of that. And I am on the record, we talked last time, and I've spoken since November of last year, that I thought the odds of even having a U.S. election was less than 50-50, and I stand by that. And I think the odds are maybe only a 30-35% chance now that we even have an election, because if the people who are in power now realize that they cannot cheat enough to win, they'll kick the table over and there won't be an election.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting thought to all our American audience, a big part of our audience to bear in mind. Bill has said this many times before. And yeah, maybe they won't be able to cheat so well. People will be watching a little too closely. They won't be able to stuff as many ballots. And maybe the book is, the stack is stacked too big against the Blues this time around. I still think beyond the left and the right of all of this, I don't think either party is going to save you. And I think saving in gold ounces is got to be the priority for all Americans, all citizens of the world right now. And there's nothing more important. Right. In fact, there was a development on Comex and NYMEX. I want your take on this. And I did actually ask one of my bullion dealer friends for his take on it. And I got a bit of a nonsensical answer. They're adding a year now to the minting of gold bars. I'm expecting coinage already has a year on it typically. But for bars, that there's actually going to be a minted date.
You're adding a what?
A year, a date. So NYMEX and Comex from the beginning of 2025, first of the Jan 25, and they've passed this. This was very recent. Actually, I was quite surprised to hear that. I had a couple of takes, some of them pretty unprofessional, some of them quite respected people. But they're starting to speculate whether you may get treated differently depending when you would need to be an investor in gold. And that 2025 might be the beginning of the year. Well, you bought that recently, and we've passed this new law on gold purchases on that scale, which is bars, which means you bought more than XYZ, and as a result, this, or capital gains that, or who knows what might be coming. I'm just wondering if you had any speculations, or if that was still news to you and you hadn't spotted that article.
Yeah, I had not seen that, but my first take on that is it doesn't matter with gold because it can be melted down and recast.
Yeah.
So you can recast it without a date, or you can melt your old gold down and recast it with a current date. So maybe the powers that be, their thought process is off and not realizing that, gold can be melted down and recast into anything you want. I mean, it could be recast into jewelry, could be recast into bars, generic rounds, or what have you.
I'm just curious with this discussion around ID, because for all those that are vehemently pro-Trump, understandably given the way Biden and this administration is put, he has already made statements surrounding the ID as the reason how he will control immigration. In other words, we need this because of that. And I'm just considering, once you get it in for people, getting it in for assets like gold bars, a chip or a minted date in the metal and making it illegal to remove, it could be the beginning of the blockchainification of assets, where don't worry, we'll hold it for you, your own NFT, all of these different scams that I'm expecting to bring your personal ID, your known ID of your bar, and there's no sale until it's clearly in a different locale with its new owner, and
it will not work. That will not work.
Yeah,
that won't work because there's so much gold and silver already in hiding that there's no way that can work. I think a really interesting story, which I think will certainly not work, is that Trump floated borrowing against Fort Knox and West Point gold. That assumes, first off, that we have 8,300 tons. And I personally assume that that's completely bogus. The U.S. has not had an audit since the 1950s, and the reasoning is it would be too expensive to audit. It might cost $25 million a year to audit it, while they're, funding bridges to nowhere for $1 billion. So that's complete bullshit. Even if we did have the gold, we're only talking about $600 billion of capital that they're talking about putting into Bitcoin. Now, the problem with that is we've got a $35 trillion.
She's adding $1 trillion every 100 days.
Right. That's my point. Is you got 600 billion versus 35 trillion that's on the books. So Bitcoin would have to go up 60-fold to clean that debt up. But what about the off-books debt? The Social Security, the Medicare, the Medicaid, the Ginnie Mae, Fannie Mae, all the guarantees, that number's well over 200 trillion now. So I think that's a complete fallacy, and a lot of people made a big deal about it, and I think that's a complete non-starter.
Yes, and I'm really glad you brought up the Bitcoin element. Isn't it funny? Because I was tracing this movement from the very beginning. It was all founded on libertarians that wanted to separate state, wanted to get away from banks, wanted to get away from proliferators, central banking, 100% about sound money. Isn't it interesting to see the new company it keeps in the form of Donald Trump, BlackRock, Larry Finkelstein, and the rest of the group, and how quickly we lost our principles, the morphing. It's almost like the Mandela effect. I watch this change with each passing day and quarter, and I get, but hey, we were the privacy guys that were protecting our assets and money. And hasn't this narrative talk? Go light on the privacy bit, guys. We'll pump your bags. Don't worry. Go light on the privacy bag. Looks very much like something that is a precursor, an interim stage as an on-ramp to digital money and everything that goes with it, CBDCs, etc. What's your take on?
Yeah, if I had to guess, the cryptos were brought forth by governments, if you will. Basically, it's like the same thing as the ETFs. What did they do? They siphoned funds away from gold and silver. So the demand that would have been for gold and silver, there's an alternative. The other thing with Bitcoin, if you remember, go back, 6, 7, even maybe 10 years ago, what was one of the big reasonings that you should buy Bitcoin? Because everything is private and nobody can see what you're doing. And that's not the case at all. I mean, the government's able to track down, every Bitcoin transaction. It's a perfect blockchain ledger. Everything is known. There's absolutely zero privacy.
And I get whenever I take the crypto bros up on this, I get no, but you can add this layer and do this and all of that. And I go, but hold on. It was from ground up inception private.
Right.
And now you're telling me, well, you've got to customize it and do X, Y, Z and put all these layers where somebody already owns the seed and the surveillance part already embedded it. It's a bit like having a mobile phone and saying, well, I'll use a VPN and thinking you've lost all the embedded tracking elements of it. It was supposed to be, in principle, intrinsically, a private money. And yeah, look, I've come down to the point. Go ahead, sorry.
That's why you use a flip phone.
Yeah, that's right. I've come down to the principle that Bitcoin is a speculation tool for coin go up on the basis of where they want to take us. And you can have 10, 15%, but I want the 80 and the 85% in the off-grid money that may eventually become illegal to own. I'm part expecting them to do that. And I say to people, make sure you've got your sales invoices to someone called Mohammed in Qatar somewhere, well prepared in advance. But it's not going to bring you privacy. It might give you wealth if you manage to sell. The thing I point out on this, and I'm interested in again on your take. People say you get the likes of Michael Saylor, so I get involved sometimes to my detriment in these ideological arguments. And he comes out and he says, volatility is the feature. It's a feature. And I go, well, hang on a minute. When everybody needs their money, and it's normally a risk-off environment where everybody's sold, you're telling me that the fact that Bitcoin touched 70K and traded 48K, when you're most likely to need it, it's lost 30%, right, and gold dropped 4%. Beta is only useful on the upside, and greed keeps you in. It's only pain and false selling that gets you out. When you've got to make a rent check, you've got to do that, and that's lockdown. It's synchronized. You're usually at the same moment when everybody else is at the same moment because you're in the same goddamn instruments he's in: property, equity, stocks, and crypto and gold. It's far better to go down 4% and actually already, while this crisis is still on, be back where you were and now at all-time highs in the space of 2 or 3 weeks, right, than to have eaten 30% and still be languishing well off the 70K you were at prior to the risking off. And it's quite frustrating because they create these sort of Jedi mind trick narratives, such as, well, why be diversified? How many chairs are you sitting on? That was my favorite argument of the Michael Saylor. How many chairs are you sitting on? It's like, oh, well, a physical point of physics in the current here and now is totally relatable to the probabilities and possibilities of financial assets in the future. And these perverse narratives that come out, actually fine, you can have a full-time job, just trying to keep people not getting befuddled by bad arguments. And this guy's turned into casino point. He's getting more leverage. He's turning his corporation into, a long Bitcoin play. His entries are always near localized highs. And I'm not sure what to make of anyone who's come from the military and then ends up doing something like this. But what's your take on Michael Saylor and the narrative spinning that we tend to get out of that?
I would just say, or I guess let me ask a question. If you're someone who wants to go to work each week, get paid each week, and you want to save, do you want to save in something that can go up 100%, down 80%? Wouldn't you rather save in a money or a currency that's the least volatile of all, but does give you a positive return over time? I mean, if you look at gold since the year 2000 to where we are right now, and you can compare it to the Dow, you can compare it to the S&P 500, with dividends reinvested, gold has outperformed stocks across the board over that 20-year, 24-year period of time.
Yeah. And
did it with no risk, because there's no risk of gold bankrupting. So, I mean, I look at it from the standpoint of, if you're building a house or you're building a skyscraper or whatever you're building, you want the best, thickest, strongest foundation you could possibly have. And in financial terms, as far as money, and can be used as currency, obviously you can trade it, is gold and silver. So I've said all along that my belief is that Bitcoin is digital air, And when the system goes tits up, it's not going to be there for you.
Yes, or it'll be immense 90% down, and you'll be flushed out the lows, and BlackRock will quickly own it all in due course. Yeah, and I mean, there is a little bit of a risk with that, but even property, but it's not nearly as volatile, and it's a slower moving market, and that's it most. So yeah, it's fascinating, and I was really glad you brought up the Bitcoin. So Jackson Hole is coming, and Powell will be speaking. We're seeing a weak dollar, even against the euro and the pound. So I think gold continues to make new highs, which probably points to maybe a bit more of that yen unwinding. Maybe it isn't 75% quite, and there's some quiet, slow, managed release of pressure in the USD, because the yen is remaining quite spiky strong at the moment. What's your take for Powell and the next few weeks ahead for the dollar, and what it might mean for gold and other investments?
As far as Jackson Hole, in my opinion, is completely meaningless. It means nothing. What means something is the BRICS meeting. That is the rest of the world telling the United States to piss off. We don't want your dollars anymore. I mean, this could be the biggest financial event literally since Bretton Woods, since 1944. You could have the rest of the world say, that's it, we're done. We're not only are we not going to use dollars, but we won't accept dollars. And the fact that the U.S. does not produce anything anymore, I mean, just look around you, maybe not in South Africa, but here in the U.S., look around you and just look at different things. Were they made or sourced from the United States? No. Hell, I mean, there's even stories now that the U.S. Mint has not been buying strictly U.S. gold and silver. They've been sourcing it from outside of the United States, which is illegal. But my point being, if stuff's not made in the United States and we get to the point where dollars are not accepted, that stuff's not coming in. You're not going to be able to get that. You'll be able to replace it. It will be unbuyable unless you give something real for something real. And that's what the BRICS is all about. They want a currency that's real and can be trusted and verified and trusted, as opposed to the dollar is basically trust us. And they've done so many bad things, year after year, and now they're really compounding. It's like minute after minute. The U.S. has done so many bad deals, so many dirty deals. How can they be trusted?
I do think that the conduct towards Russia and their money, and not treating the system as agnostic, was probably the single biggest own goal. And I continue to reference it, and I'm glad you brought it up again today, because the knock-on effect of all major nations, don't forget Brazil sitting in the BRICS, Russia's going to say, well, you know how it works. And they're going to go, can't argue with the facts. India, China, South Africa, all of them, and all the new nations that are wanting in, there's going to be no arguments. I mean, you're talking about wholesale confiscation and a morality that's being put forward. So it's deadly. It's deadly for the dollar. But what of the theory? It's bringing our dollar milkshake friends that say, well, hold on a minute, all that debt is in dollars. That's in the emerging markets. And they're going to have to pay it back. And because of the way debt works, you need more than you originally borrowed to pay back. And interest payments are going to be needed. And as a result, the dollar is going to be bid up at some point. How do you see, is there ever a moment where that takes place? Or is the degree of acceptance going to be going down at the same time as they're playing out, and there's going to be a sort of cancellation effect? People will start having more gold-based money and almost looking to pay back their debt in dollars. How's that theory work out in your mind, if at all?
Well, first off, countries have looked at this and they've said if they can do it to Russia, which is either the greatest or second greatest military power on earth, they can do it to us. So, there's your reason for moving away from dollars and moving into gold. As far as a debt liquidation and debt having to be paid off, how do you know it's going to be paid off? How do you know the BRICS nations just don't say, piss off, we're done? We're not paying you. Do something about it.
Yeah. And that military, which is being committed, just a quick headline. Sorry, I'm jumping in there. I want you to finish that thought. Palantir's CEO has been saying that there's 3 fronts that America is due to go to war, and they're supporting that. And they've been giving information to Israel and Ukraine on WhatsApp and everything for the genocide that's going in the various nations. And they're saying a new war on 3 fronts. America will be going into war on 3 fronts. Just to add to your narrative. Sorry, finish what you were going to say, but I just thought that was an interesting news flash.
Yeah, I mean, it leads to war. There's no question about it. And I mean, war is what the West wants because the West is financially broke. And the only way to hide the grift, the illegal activities, is to kick the table over. And the easiest way to kick the table over is to go to war. I mean, this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years that, when a king is broke, they go to war. So it just makes sense that, the U.S. will, without a, and if you look at what's being done, the U.S. is poking country after country all over the world and has been doing so for years because the mindset is forget about kicking the table over. The mindset is go back to 2001. The World Trade Center supposedly got knocked down by planes, which is hilarious. But the economy was collapsing. The markets were collapsing. And the thought process was, okay, well, let's go to war. That turns an economy around. So that's the thought process, is that war turns the economy around. The only problem now is you're talking about it's a bigger system. The weapons are different. The U.S. does not have hypersonic. Russia has hypersonic. I mean, the U.S. has fallen completely behind. And that's what leads me to think and also the U.S. has fallen behind militarily, but from a portrayal standpoint, we got our ass kicked and kicked out of Afghanistan. We left $85 billion worth of equipment there. And publicly, what do we have? We got a bunch of generals and admirals that wear skirts and say that, the equity and inclusion is more important than bombing the crap out of our opponent. Well, that doesn't fly when you're talking about war. I mean, I could go on and on that topic, and I won't. But the U.S.
Without getting into the military, Bill, without getting into the actual merits of military, people will say, well, there's other people that are better qualified to have the debt. No one's going to buy the other side of the debt that you need to raise. That Russia's on sounder economic footing since it's cleared all that debt, actually, than anyone else. And if you're undermining your payment system and you're undermining and you've no longer made it agnostic, you're going to confiscate anybody's money. People are playing much less on your railway system than they used to. They're playing on new ones, and you're issuing debt to fund all of this. On top of the fact that you're already doing $1 trillion every 100 days just for garbage, right, where you're not officially at war, even though people are clearly on the ground in Ukraine, in Russia, even. Etc. When you go full ball conventional war, when you have to keep aircraft carriers out at sea with thousands of complements of men and high value planes taking off, it gets real expensive. You can take that trillion of Janets and you can double it straight up, with very conservatively, and on an ongoing basis, it only gets bigger. So I mean, this sounds like the final plunder of Rome. Because you and I don't get rich out of that expenditure. It is the inflation that will strangle and kill everyone. Inflation can't be going away if you're going to be having war on 3 fronts. Ukraine, Russia, Iran, and China. Now they're talking about. They actually want to directly engage China. China's getting more aggressive in the Philippines because of America's engagement with Ukraine and Russia, and also the Israeli conflict. they're totally distracted. They can make their moves. If I was Chinese, things that I'd had my eye on, I would be seizing the moment now and shortly when America overcommits itself to all sorts of other things. Surely it just feels like the final days of Rome, and that they're stripping the valuables off. You know, the insiders are stripping the gold chandeliers down and stashing them.
Right. Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, it's been a looting. I mean, it's like what Russia was back in the 1990s. The oligarchs, everything. But it's interesting. You mentioned Russia, and I forget whether the number is 14% or 17%, but that's their debt to GDP. Yeah. They're on the most sound footing, really, of any nation on the planet. And you mentioned China. Yeah, they've got some serious debt problems. But what did they do how did they use that debt, the debt that they built up? They built cities, they built rail lines, they built airports, they built infrastructure, they built stuff. And
how many transgender quangos for equity and DEI did they fund out of that money, I wonder?
Zero. Zero. They probably executed people. My point being, the money that they borrowed, they could turn around and, like I said, say, piss off, we're not paying. But guess what? We got the stuff that we've already built. And what did the U.S. do with the debt that they built up? We ate it. We've eaten our seed corn.
Yeah. It's difficult. It's difficult not to say, it's very much end of time, and gold is the canary that is tweeting right now. And the safest things are in American viewers and our Western viewers, which are largely the English nations should be doing, is just focusing on saving in gold. You can do it monthly by small amounts. I mean, is there any other bigger solution? I mean, apart from the prepping and the security and the civil unrest and all of that, getting into a full-on prepper show. But in a financial sense of retaining balance sheet, is there anything else you would add to that?
Not really, because if you go back hundreds of years, what's the best thing to own? I mean, you could go back to the tulip bulb craze. What's the best thing to own when things collapse? You want to be in cash. Well, back then, cash was gold and silver. And then paper came along and became derivatives of gold and silver. But the gold and silver are the monies themselves. Everything else is currency. So, the shithouse coming down, you want to be in cash. Well, guess what? Go back to the original definition of cash, and that is money that cannot bankrupt. I mean, the whole list of describing gold, describing silver. You want to be sitting in cash so that when everything does come down, you are liquid and you can buy things for literally pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, that's the way to play it. What else would you say is significant that you've seen or commented? I mean, it seems like everything we've said in previous shows, we just seem to be incrementally moving further, deeper into the mire. The whole West is doomed. You've probably seen some of the outrage tweets that Elon Musk seems to be repeating on the United Kingdom to a great deal with regards to the two-tier policing going on there.
Exactly.
Where, Facebook posters get a space made in full prisons for them, and they release violent criminals and illegal immigrants. I mean, this seems a provocation on the social side or an attack vector on indigenous European nations, peoples. And I suppose the thing is not to give them the emotional outcome they want. That means outrage and waving of fists and storming. You just got to leave and remove your tax payments from the nation state. But in some instances, not that easy to leave. So what would your advice be? Because we have also, 20%. We've got about 55% US citizens here. We've got about 20% from the United Kingdom. What should these people do? What's Bill Holter's plan for this World Economic Forum Prime Minister and these police cops that are finding space in prisons and releasing violent criminals to do this? there's obviously a provocation, and you've always got to be careful not to respond emotionally.
Right. Well, I think it's pretty curious that, they're throwing people in jail now in Great Britain for praying or for or not even making a Facebook post, but reposting a Facebook post or retweeting a tweet.
Yeah.
It's not even from you. You're just passing it on and you go to jail. Society is going to rise up. I mean, if things are this bad from a society standpoint, while everything is supposedly so good, I mean, look at the markets, they're all-time highs, people feel wealthy. The only reason this is not completely blown up is because the equity markets have not fallen apart. And once they do, you're going to have pissed off people all over the world. That's the first thing. The second thing, and I said this probably 6 or 8 months ago, and I got confirmation basically today that I read an article that says Russia is willing to allow immigrants escaping neoliberal policies.
Western, yes.
Right. And what that tells me is someone like you or someone like me that gets persecuted for, trying to tell the truth, and Russia will take us in. I mean, I think that's great. They have a real rule of law.
And can I add to that? Their corporate tax rate percentage is 15%. And actually, if you register as a, as a contractor, you can actually get that number down to single digits in terms of what you would pay. And they don't even require history or language. You literally could relocate and continue to talk English like I'm doing here. I'm in Panama, by the way, today. I could do it from the Crimea, which is actually quite sunny and warm and by the sea. I don't have to be snowed in. It's not Siberia. It's a big old landmass there. It's not all, grim, and actually be left alone. Probably have less secrecy. In fact, there's been more arrests for social media posts in Britain than by a multiple of 10 or 20 or 30 than there have been in Russia.
Right.
Yeah. So isn't it?
When I read,
go ahead. So
when I read that article, I was just like, that it makes total sense that they're offering that, because they will get some great minds. They will get some very high quality people trying to escape the bullshit that is our daily lives in the West.
I absolutely agree. In fact, I was reading again about getting good quality people, and you've got the southern border that's leaking like sieves. But if you want to immigrate legally to America, it's an absolute nightmare to get in and to get past. And if you look at Dubai and these other places that they will be establishing as meccas for nomad capitalists and remote workers, it's far, far easier, far more slick, far more welcoming. And it takes me back, I think, to the airport example I gave of Singapore. It's the first thing you see and the last thing you see, and it's quality. I won't speak to their rather draconian CV-19 rules. That wasn't a win. But they make it pleasant to arrive, easy to process and get in Dubai for new workers and people to establish there. They're trying to get people into the desert to be workers there, and they're setting up entertainment, football, wealth, good earnings, and all of that. Now, again, I'm not a massive fan for Dubai or the CV-19 policies of Singapore, but there is something in some of what they're doing. There's going to be a migration of skills that is going to be matching the migration of the precious metals, I fear. And that's a moving from the West to Middle East and further east. And isn't it always the case? And should people not be thinking about actually starting about that move rather than being the one who has to pick up all the rubbish and remember the good old times in an empire that is sinking?
Yeah, gold has been moving from west to east for many, many, many years. You could see it in Chinese imports. If you look at what's been happening over the last just year, 2 years, 3 years, look at what's happened to inventories on Comex. Look at what's happening at inventories on the LBMA. And then look at the imports on Shanghai. And that tells you exactly where the metal's going. And you can include Switzerland, where they've been shipping metal to. So it tells you that metal has been going from west to east. And the old saying, he who has the gold makes the rules. Power always follows money. Power always follows gold, because gold is money.
Yeah. Yeah. And power, brains, work opportunities, mentality, a welcome, go where you treated best, ability to move, right, ability to start working, tax rates. These all form, hey, we open for business. We want good, talented people. If you've got the means and the capabilities, we're going to make this easy for you to join and bring your skills, your work, your energy, your economic output. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening. I mean, the West is importing the lowest common denominator. I literally think North Africa is emptying out its prisons, and probably the same in Mexico.
On purpose.
Yeah. And the lowest common denominator.
No way. This is, I mean, what the West has done, what they've done with immigration, is too stupid to not be the plan.
Yeah. No, it's not incompetence. That's the other frustration. Don't forget incompetence when you understand that there is a real cartel engineering the direction and the downfall of your society right now, where you're sitting, what is your plan, what are you going to do about it? It's unbelievable. Bill, this has been exceptional. I love talking to you. Any parting thoughts and aspects you'd like to mention before we wrap?
I've pretty much been wrapping my interviews up with understand what's happening, where this is going, and do the best you can to prepare for it. You're not going to be able to plug every hole, but, try to think of any and every scenario to help save yourself, save your family, because if you don't protect yourself, nobody else is going to do it for you.
100% government isn't there. And also, I'll add to that, if I may, part of the social media vibe and all of that is also to stress you. There's a great analogy, and maybe we'll finish on the story. About 1,000 years this was done ago. This is how old the psychological test was. They put two lambs that were born, that were siblings, in a manger, in a folder. They each had their own square. And then in the third one, there was a wolf that they kept, a captured wolf. And one of the lambs was conscious of the neighboring wolf, and the other one was completely free, without knowing that in actual fact he was sharing a space within a certain distance of a real predator. And the one that was adjacent and was made clear died early, young, and was sickly. Do not let the psyop of these events intimidate you into poor health. The game is to punish them with your good mental strength, your positivity, and your optimism, and your determination to not only survive, but thrive and be a perpetual thorn in their side. And I live for that every day.
Right.
I smile and I laugh at them every day. And you get out, unplug, get that sunshine in, get exercise, dance to your favorite music, and go and be an absolute pain in their backside in everything you do, in every walking way, in a realm of optimism. Do not let them affect you. And before these pandemics, they love fear to create panic, to create low energy, and to suppress immune systems. So we should all be on our guard as they talk about.
Francis, I have a question on that. And I mean, I've talked about this now for probably 10 years, but talked about it quite a bit over the last 2, 3, 5 years. Why is it that a portion of the population is so easily misled? And then why is it that there's a portion of the population that looks at something, they go, I call bullshit. I don't believe that. They're lying, blah, blah, blah. Is it something they're putting in the water? Is it chemtrails? What is it? I don't really understand why some people can look at something and fully understand it, and another person can look at the same thing and they're like, "Oh, well, that's correct." I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a very deep question. I think it starts at psychology. I think it starts, if you do things that make people more prone to nerves, they're easily intimidated. So it could be an attack vector on the nervous system, which could be, you could argue fluoride in the water. You could argue sodium fluoride, by the way, not the good one. You could argue all forms of potential contamination that go into the food supply chain. I could only speculate, and I think you would be as good at speculating as I would, Bill. I don't think I'd be your superior in any way. But there's any form of attack vectors, and keeping you in a state of suboptimal health is actually where you're more prone. All my worst trades, all my worst actions, all my worst decisions have largely coincided when I was either toxic, sleepless, or emotionally unhappy in the financial markets. So, if you're prone to drinking on Saturday nights and Sunday evenings and then rocking up on a Monday half hungover, you're going to burn your account. You're not going to think logically. You're not even going to be self-aware enough to see you're in a subordinated state. So actually, I'm a man with very modest habits. I even treat caffeine and coffee as a stimulant that's a nervous system. And I pursue a protocol, or what I'd like to call, and there's a lot of it around now under Huberman, his podcast, like the super health protocols of fighting inflation, even if I don't even have it. In other words, you need to work on the basis that you already have cancer, you already have sickness within you, and you're perpetually eliminating it. Don't wait till some doctor confirms it. You're already chronic by then. Right. They're trying to contaminate you. I distill my water. I don't trust any statist organization. I work on the principle actively because this is my basis of experience, in that they are doing things that benefit them and that's not me. And that often my existence alone, especially if I'm not funding their tax machine, which I tend not to do, is a bane to them. So I treat them as the attack vector on me, and I am continually cleansing myself, and I am distrustful of all status interventions. And I've assumed that mental state from quite early on in my life as a hardened cynic and someone who says, sorry, that's not a pattern. You can get something wrong once, you can get something wrong twice. You start getting these same things wrong in the same places all the time, and I start to see you as the Trojan in the system. So I think that philosophically, I like to get as close to Mother Earth. And if you've grown it and it's come out the ground and you've washed it, and if I'm buying from stores, ozone treat it, get all the stuff off because the water doesn't do it. There's a lot of protocols you can do that continue to keep you in a high mental state, a vigorous health, and I intend to be a pain in their backside. It's my cause célèbre. So I am working on my health for multiple reasons, for other people's life and health, as well as my own and my own family. And once you embrace that and you start studying, and it helps to have a spouse or a partner that has a similar mindset. Because, you can't have a smoker and someone who likes to down tequilas every Wednesday night as a partner if you're going that route. But I would seriously say now is the time. All of us actually need to be in optimal fighting physical state, right down to personal self-defense, health, and try be as unreliant on pharmaceutical as possible, with the possible exceptions of having a deep ivermectin stash potentially, because it seems they're going that particular route with the flu and the respiratory attacks. Possibly, this Mpox thing, there's a couple of very well-known treatments. If they go live with that PSYOP, I'm going to make sure I have a stash. So it's a full-time job, recognizing that you're in a war. And I think until people recognize they're in a war with a statist attack vector, they probably being poisoned and being dulled down. And eventually, unfortunately, the compounding effect of all of that is you lose. So live to 100, live healthy and strong. I see these Japanese Tai Chi guys doing 98-year-olds doing, finger pull-ups, and I aspire to be them. And that's, that's my take. We don't know the number of means that they're trying to get at us. So treat as if you are being contaminated by virtue of just participating in the plan. Yeah,
always. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. How do people find you, Bill? Should they wish to engage with you further, please let them know.
Yeah, you can go to my website, and I would urge you. I've not urged people to subscribe before, but it just makes sense. It's a free subscription. I usually post stuff once a day. Go to billholter.com. If you subscribe, whenever I post stuff, it'll come into your email, so you'll know that something was posted. You'll see what was posted. You can go to the website or just read it on your email. If you're looking to trade in gold or silver, you can reach me through the website, or you can go directly to my email, my business email. It's bholter@proton.me.
Excellent. We'll put those same notes in the video when we conclude, and I'll certainly urge you, a man of common sense from the very beginning, intricately involved in GATA, speaking truth to sound money, Bill Holter. Thank you for your time today, Bill.
Thank you, Francis.